Hi, welcome back to the attic. I'm Chris Walls, and we're going to continue our tribute to Mr. Tony Rice. Not with me playing any music or doing anything like that. I've decided to share the audio from the workshops that I mentioned in the last episode of Music in the Attic, and there are going to be several segments of it. I'm going to do it in installments. The first segments will be from the workshop that he gave at the Old Town School of Folk Music in 2004. And I had somebody write in the comment section to the last video that I posted about this guitar, and if there was a crack up here, and yeah, there kind of is. I'll tell you a little bit about this guitar. Maybe I'll do that in installments too. I got this in 1991. I ordered this right from the factory. I talked to Richard Hoover on the phone. I called him up. I just called the factory up, and they turned me over to him. And we chatted for a long time. And I was about to spend more money on a guitar than I'd spent on anything else in my life previous to that. And after the conversation that we had on the phone, Richard Hoover and I, he said, we'll build you a guitar. You'll get the next one that comes off the production line, and we'll send it to you, and you can keep it for, he may have only said 3 months. Memory thinks it's 6 months, but it's 6 months, I think, is what he said. He said, if you don't like it, you can send it back, and we'll give you back all your money. And I said to him on the phone, I said, how can you make that kind of offer? You have no idea how badly I might beat up on it. Well, obviously. And he said, well, if we can't build you the guitar that you're looking for based on the conversation that we've just had, we shouldn't take your money. And I thought, man, that's somebody who's really standing behind their product. And that was, will be 30 years ago this March. So, yeah. This guitar has seen a lot of wear, a lot of road wear, a lot of use. All the finish cracks. I don't know if you can see all the finish cracks on the top are courtesy of Federal Express. I sent the guitar out to their repair guy, Santa Cruz Guitar's repair guy, because I was having some neck separation, and they said, "Well, send it out. You're the original owner, and our repair guy Dan will do the repair, and you'll just have to pay for shipping it back and forth." And their repair guy at that time lived in Montana, so I had to send this guitar to Montana. And when it came back here to Chicago, where I live, it was in February, and there was a big snowstorm, and the FedEx trucks couldn't get out. So this guitar spent the night in an unheated warehouse somewhere. And when I took it out of the case, it had all these finish cracks on it because it gotten so cold. But somebody asked about this crack. There's actually two of them. There's this one, and then there's a little one right there. And those started to show up when I was on the road with the Special Consensus. This was my road guitar when I was in that band. I was in the band for 3.5 years. And we were on the road. We were somewhere out west, and it was hot and it was dry. I think it was the summer or maybe into the fall. I can't remember exactly when. But I noticed these cracks were starting to show, and they didn't look the same as the other finish cracks, which I'd already gotten by that point. And I wasn't sure if they were in the wood or if they were just cosmetic. But I couldn't take a chance because we were out in the middle of the tour. We were out in the middle of nowhere, and there wasn't going to be a repair guy anywhere near where we were going to be, and there was no time to deal with it anyhow. So I said to Greg Cahill, the guy that runs the Special Consensus, I said, "Greg, where's the super glue?" And he said, "Oh, it's in there's a little tray underneath the driver's seat. You'll find it in there." So I took the guitar. This is by the way not a how-to video, so don't do what I did. So I took the guitar and I saw where the two cracks were, and I took the super glue and I ran a bead on each crack, and I let the guitar set flat out like this for about, I don't know, an hour or so, till everything was dried up, and I just left it like that for years. It had these little beads of super glue. Years and years later, I took this guitar to the guy that does all my repair work, a man named Jim Craig, who has a guitar shop and repair place up in Evanston called Hog-Eye Music. And he did some work on it and took a buffer and buffed the excess super glue off the top so that you couldn't really see it. You can still see the crack, but the excess super glue he was able to buff that out. And I noticed that when I picked up the guitar, and I said, "Oh, you buffed all that excess super glue off there." And I said, I've always been curious. I was never sure if those cracks were cosmetic or if they'd gotten all the way into the wood. And he said, "Oh, they were all the way in the wood. I got in there with a mirror and I checked it out." And I said, "Oh, did you have to get under there and put in a couple of cleats or something?" And he sort of looked at me askance over his glasses, and he said, "No, the glue job you did seems to be holding just fine." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then he sort of twisted the knife. He said, "If you're ever looking for a job as a repairman, give me a call." And I was like, "Okay." All right. So that's the story on those cracks. I got a few other stories about this guitar, but I'm not going to waste any more time. Maybe I'll tell a couple more of them in subsequent videos. So we're going to hear the first segment. It's about just under 40 minutes. This first segment of the Tony Rice workshop from 2004. And what I did, why I'm doing them in segments, is because I've gone in and I've re-EQ'd Tony's voice so it's a little bit more present. I've edited out some of the dead spots. There, at one point, somebody comes in and asks him what he wants to have for dinner before the concert, so I've nipped that out of there. And what we're left with is Tony talking about his early exposure to bluegrass, the first things that he learned on the guitar, meeting Clarence White, starting to play and taking over for Dan Crary in the Bluegrass Alliance. Some people start asking questions about techniques. Somebody asks about the old guitar, and he tells the story of how he acquired that guitar, and I think that's about where that first segment ends. So that's a good chunk of it. There's going to be a few more segments in subsequent episodes of the Attic, and we'll present not only the 2004 workshops but also the 2010 workshops. And I'll just put up the little title card that I use, which is a picture of this part of the guitar. So you just sit back and listen to Tony enlightening us in many ways. We're very lucky to have him. I feel very lucky to have this recording, and I was real lucky to have the experience to be able to present the workshop with him. So here's the first segment from 2004, and I'll see you back here in the attic. And he just continues to redefine acoustic guitar, bluegrass guitar, flat picking guitar, time and time again, and casts a huge shadow across the landscape of flat pick guitar. So, Mr. Tony Rice, welcome to the Old Town School of Folk
Good to be
Music.
here.
Now, I told everybody about this workshop that this is not going to be so much of how to play this note, how to play that note, but more of your approach on how you play the music, how you receive the music, how you deal with the music and the guitar, and so maybe that's a fair place to jump off.
Very good place to start, I think, right there. I want to offer a philosophical disclaimer here that everything that I may tell you here today, it may or may not help you toward your own aspirations and goals as a musician, or I'm sure everybody here is going to want to try to head toward this goal of better musicianship. I'm assuming that's what you're all here for, right? Is to improve your musicianship. Well, that's going to happen on different levels. And some of you will make it. Some of you will not. But that's reality. And I wanted to start out by telling you that I can already look at each individual ones of you right now and tell you which ones are going to make it and which ones they Don't ask me specifically if you will or not.
How about if we start off with maybe just a little bit of history to kind of bring it up. What brought you to the acoustic guitar, and maybe if you could talk about, along with that, what was going on with acoustic guitar at the time you were picking it up in terms of bluegrass, rhythm, flat picking, etc.
Well, actually, at the time, that's about all it was. There was no defined bluegrass guitar per se. I mean, it was just simply a rhythm instrument in a musical concept that was originated by Bill Monroe and other people. But what first grabbed my attention as a young child was my father had this old record player that back then there was nothing more than 78s, or not much more than 78 RPM records. I'm in my mid-50s, by the way, so if I look 65, I apologize for that. Anyway, but this somehow fascinated me, put on this Flat and Scruggs 78 record. And admittedly, one of the things that fascinated me about this was watching this thing turn around. Played this music coming out of this box because I'd never seen it. But there was something about that music that I remember. Of all the other music forms that I was hearing as a child at the time, this one grabbed me in a way that I still can't explain.
That was bluegrass.
That was bluegrass. Yeah, that was Flat and Scruggs playing a tune called "You're Not a Drop in the Bucket." And instrumental on the other side called Foggy Mountain Special. So I remember asking my father after we heard that record, I said, okay, what else you got? Started putting on some Reno and Smiley records, Monroe Brothers records, Delmore Brothers, Lubin Brothers. Anyway, that was my initial interest into it. And my father was I think what you would call a serious amateur guitar player and mandolin player. He was from North Carolina. And this was in California where I grew up. And anyway, so there was always one of those two instruments laying around the house. And I grabbed one and my brother grabbed the other one. The first one I grabbed was a mandolin. And I instantly hated it. So, needless to say, my brother Larry and I switched instruments. And to tell you the truth, I really don't remember much about the mechanics of learning how to play what was then chords on a guitar. I remember the only thing I could dig up for a pick was my mother had this big giant comb with some great big teeth in it. And I yanked one of those things out of there and it worked. And I thought, oh, here's an inexhaustible supply.
Now, what age were you when you came across Clarence White?
I think when I met Clarence, I was, let's see, that would have been in 1959. So I would have been 8 years old and Clarence would have been 15.
And you were already playing at that time?
Well, yeah, but I playing in the sense of it was just only 3 or 4 chords that I had known how to play at that point.
But you had started.
Yeah, I had started by then, and of course the bluegrass and country music back then, there was no need to know more than 3 or 4 chords. That's all you. It was pretty high tech in those days if you knew how to make F.
And Clarence's style and early influence on you, maybe talk about those things, his particular style, what made it unique, different from what else was going on, and how it affected you and your own growth as a guitar player.
There was a few things. For one, the guitar my father had given me was a D18. If you are familiar with Martin instruments, D18s. Well, I had never seen an instrument that had white binding around the outside of the edge instead of black. And Clarence had this old beat up piece of a guitar, which happens to be in that case. Anyway, I thought this was really unique. But you can imagine an 18-year-old looking at a 15-year-old playing this bluegrass music in a way that I had never imagined Lester Flatt playing it, or Red Smiley, or any of the other rhythm players. And there was this big kid. All of a sudden, you know how when you're young, you can have you encounter a friendship with somebody that's several years older than you. He was this big kid. Even though Clarence White, I don't think he ever grew beyond maybe 5 feet tall or something. Nonetheless, there was this big kid. We started up a friendship. The rest is kind of history from that moment on. But keep this in mind too, that Clarence wasn't playing any lead guitar at the time. He was only playing rhythm with his brothers.
Had he already started to develop that, well, I'll use the term non-traditional sense of rhythm?
Yes, he had. That was what was really unique, and to me, in a way that I, to this day, cannot explain how that happened. There was something magical about his playing. And it's amazing that this started out this early, and that we were both such an early age. And he always retained that whenever he played, all the way up until his passing in 1973. And I tried to copy that, because that was the person I wanted to be. I tried that for years and years. I thought, one of these days I'm going to be a Clarence White. Well, you know, I never made it. I became somebody different.
That's a really important point, and maybe you can kind of go into that and how it would apply to anybody who's picking up the guitar, because we're all a product of our influences, and the trick is how to find yourself and your own way of playing and creating within that context.
Yeah, very good point, very good analogy. What happened to me personally was I became a musician. I became the musician of my own identity out of my inability to play like Clarence White. That's what that was, how that happened. I mean, I'm not the only person that's happened to. It's happened to countless other musicians of notoriety, that they came into prominence, or their style became something very unique, because they had their heroes too, people that they admired and they wanted to play like, and they couldn't do it. And so the result of that was that they didn't necessarily take some other path toward play like somebody else. They accepted that they couldn't play like the person that they wanted to. And then at some point you give up and you go, okay, I've got one choice here. I'm going to sink or swim. That means I'm either going to do this the way I know how to do it, or I'm going to fail at this. I'm going to go into something else.
Now, along with listening to Clarence, were there other influences that you were listening to at the time that was maybe helping you to get towards that sense of playing other than Clarence?
Yeah, there was. I mean, like Lester Flatt was a good rhythm player. Jimmy Martin. By that point, I had been listening to bluegrass music long enough that I knew the good ones from the bad ones. The bluegrass music that had drive or something magical about it versus bluegrass music that didn't. And I, at an early age, started to really admire the validity, if that's the right word, of the rhythm playing of Lester Flatt and Jimmy Martin, and Red Smile, and others. But they all have different approaches. Jimmy Martin, for example, was the first person in bluegrass music to take a guitar and use a flat pick, play rhythm. All reports to the contrary notwithstanding, he was the person that did that.
Because Lester Flatt used a thumb
He
pick
used
and
a
a
thumb
finger
pick
pick,
at the time.
Carter Stanley did the
Carter
same.
Stanley did, and so. But anyway, this Vassar Clements tells this interesting story because Vassar Clements was working with Monroe when the interest in Jimmy Martin was there. For whatever reason, Monroe and Vassar Clements had taken an interest in Jimmy Martin as a singer. But Jimmy used the flat pick. And Vassar tells us that in the bus, Jimmy knew that Monroe wasn't particularly happy with the way Jimmy Martin played rhythm. He liked his singing, but he wasn't really pleased with his rhythm guitar playing. Now keep in mind, this is a rhythm guitar player that came on to be, who I still think is the greatest rhythm guitar player today, is Jimmy Martin. So Vassar said, well, have you ever tried one using one of these little flat things right here? And so anyway, the rest is history. Jimmy tried that. and in rhythm bluegrass guitar playing as we know it was born sometime in the early 50s.
Let me jump ahead a little bit to the time when you took over for Dan Curry and the Bluegrass Alliance, and that would have been approximately what year?
It was in 1970, Labor Day of 1970.
Now, at that time, you'd been playing for a number of years. What had developed in your style by that time that you would keep, and what would change, if you can recall?
What I had developed then was essentially it was like a bunch of arpeggios that came out of my head, and I'd been, as Garcia says, I had been noodling around with some of these things for years, and I didn't even know at the time how they would fit into the overall concept of bluegrass guitar playing, but I knew I wanted to do that. And
you're talking in a lead sense?
Yeah, in a lead sense. Anyway, Sam Bush heard me playing sitting on a picnic table, and what had happened was the group at the time was called the Bluegrass Alliance, and Dan was leaving, and the mandolin player, lead singer named Danny Jones were both leaving. Well, Sam had replaced Danny Jones, and they were looking for a replacement for Dan. And Sam heard me, and we had known each other from a previous year. Anyway, Sam said, hey man, you want a job? And I said, yeah. After, he told me it wouldn't be replacing that Dan Prairie was leaving. Do you want a job? And I said, yeah, sure, I'll try it.
I'm going to jump off into the audience. Are there any questions at this point? Do not be shy, please.
Just curious, Clarence White, you said you were trying to play like him.
Right.
Can you tell us a tune or something that you were trying to, back then, you were trying to play like Clarence White that you couldn't do?
The first one that comes to mind would be Wildwood Flower, or something like that Clarence would pick out, or as part of of their band then, which was then called the Country Boys. There was no such thing as the Kentucky Colonels at that point. And he would do little kick-offs to Jimmy Brown, the Newsboy, and some other things that featured guitar a la George Shuffler or something like that Clarence would do. So, but not only, just the way he played rhythm and his overall approach to the guitar in general was what I couldn't do. I tried to do it. Yeah,
Right. A lot of great musicians, Art Tatum, Jimi Hendrix, went through periods in their life where they played all day long. From the time they got up to the time they went to bed, they walk around the house playing.
Right.
Power. Did you go through a stage like that?
Yeah, I did. I was well into my adult life and my career when that started to subside to some degree. But I did, yeah. For most of my life, I had done that every day. Through middle childhood, there would have been periods where I wanted to be out playing baseball and things like that. I mean, I wasn't a recluse or anything like that. But yeah, I did. I did that for many, many years.
Yeah, Michael?
Did you have some kind of a practice routine that kind of brought you to the style that you like?
The only way I could describe that would be that I would practice the guitar and I would stay with it until I felt like I had learned what it was I'd set out to learn. And even if that took long hours, day after day after day, if that's what it took, then that's what it would end up being. But that was when I was discovering my own limitations, because there were things that I heard in my head that I wanted to play. And when I use the term "in my head," it's like, I think all innovators have that one thing in common. That's what makes them innovators, is that this stuff is unique, comes from somewhere. It could come from one of two places. It could come out of your head, or you could plagiarize it and steal it from somebody else, but I didn't want to do that. But the stuff that I was hearing in my own head was basically trial and error as to how I could mechanically execute that. It'd be like working a Rubik's Cube, and you get everything except that last square is turned wrong or something. So you gotta go back to the drawing board and start over.
What about like right hand technique? I mean, do you have any suggestions for people about how to improve right hand technique?
I probably will have later on in this discussion. For the moment, I don't. We'll probably have to lead into that. But yeah, I could offer some.
Keith?
Yeah. At some point, listening to all this bluegrass, you obviously started listening to jazz guitar players.
Yes, I did.
Wes Montgomery, people like that.
Yeah.
When did that start happening for you, and how much did that happen before you worked with Brisman in that collaboration?
I was in the early years of high school when I started to take an interest in other music forms. I heard Dave Brubeck play Take 5, and there was something about that hit me in the same way that in my earlier childhood that bluegrass had hit me. I thought, wow, this is really neat. I'd love to be able to do this one day. But then I heard this band, and I looked at this guitar I had, and I thought, yeah, this thing doesn't go with this band. I don't think Brubeck was looking for a guy that played a D18.
Coming out of second half of that, coming out of bluegrass, how much theory did you have to get under your belt before you started making that sound? How much of your jazz was by ear alone?
Or it was all by ear. Virtually everything was by ear. Up into the point when I started to work with Grisman in 1975. And I was fortunate that there was a lot of people that I had access to had knowledge of that. One was Bill Keith, the banjo player Bill Keith. Another one was Richard Green, who had been playing with Grisman at the time, the violinist Richard Green. And of course Grisman himself. But in that band I replaced a guy called John Carlini. And try to keep in mind that Grisman's band at that point was still, it was an experiment, is what it was. It was still very much in experimental stages. And these guys weren't really a band per se because they had other things they were doing. Richard Green was then playing with Loggins and Messina, and John Carlini had left to conduct the Ice Capades Orchestra, which he did for 14 years. But anyway, Carlini and I befriended each other, and if I would have to say anybody had influenced me toward using theory and try to gathering knowledge of theory and apply that toward my own musicianship, it would be John Carlini. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, Randy?
Sort of in relation to Keith's question, like you mentioned, people like John Coltrane, and then on another realm, Debussy is sort of some sorts of influences. Was that intentional to explore that in order to broaden your vocabulary, or was that just something you were hearing and then just got interested in and explored from this?
Well, yeah, what I did is I heard the music of Coltrane and Miles and Bill Evans, and even some years before that, I'd been really fascinated by Oscar Peterson. But that was the side of my musicianship that was only devoted to listening at that point. And what was the question again?
Really, were you like intentionally trying to expand your vocabulary by listening to other types of music?
No, not as a tool to expand my musical vocabulary. But what I did find out was after I'd listened to these guys enough, I started to subconsciously be aware of their approach to musicianship. Not that I would try to play a Miles solo or a Coltrane solo or something like that. But you know, it's really weird, through those guys and that music form, I started to learn what was acceptable and what wasn't. And you know, what was really stepping over the line in terms of tonality of music as we know tone music. Well, these were atonal players, or they could be. And I thought, well, damn, you know, if these guys can get away with playing some weird notes, I can do it. So I started to do that, and out of that was just another extension of my own individual approach to music. Was that was part of that learning process.
Can you go over chord substitutions and how you put them into, you know, let's say your work on Gordon Lightfoot songs is generally three chord songs, that you make them incredibly complex with the guitar arrangement, with chord substitutions.
I'll do the best I can. The more you do this, the more you gather. The more you gather certain phrases. You learn different, probably the word I'm looking for is inversions. You learn different inversions of what would be the same chord. Okay, you can take any simple chord like a C chord, and there's probably 1,000 different ways to make a C chord. But what makes a person choose one over another would be what they perceive to be a tonal color that's pleasant, that comes out of it. And so like in Lightfoot's music, for example, in a simple 3 or 4 chord tune, well, he's just playing the basic chords as we know them coming from a guitar. But back to the trial and error thing, I was thinking, okay, what would happen if I would use a C 6/9 flat 5 there instead of just a C triad? You know, what would that sound like? How would that go with the voice? How would that fit in with the music to use that substitution? or play a different inversion.
So do you arrange them as trial and error, or do you have some kind of general idea of what kind of inversions you're going to be using to gain a certain feeling?
Actually, it's both. There's kind of a rough framework that I work with when I did start to develop a tune like that. And then to keep from boring myself, as well as others, I would resort to other inversions that I thought would work. And a good example is if I recorded a Lightfoot tune like Cold on the Shoulder, well, and there's the recorded version of that tune that's on the record, but I guarantee it's never been played that way since. Different every time, different chords every time. I can bore the shit out of myself.
I want to bring up a point of execution of both your rhythm and your lead style. And this will be a broad topic with a bunch of smaller topics, I'm sure, and folks out here will just lead it where it wants to go. It seems to me, in order to play the way you do, the notes, the quickness, the rhythm style, there has to be an ease and a relaxation in both hands. And in order to achieve that, your guitar it's got to be set up just right.
Yeah, that is critical, especially at my age. It wasn't so critical when I was younger. But
So how, at that point, how has that changed over time? Has the action on, let's say, on your particular instrument or instruments that you own, gone up and down over time, or?
it's gone way down. There's a physical disability I have, which dictates that and how far it will go down. It's called osteoarthritis. But by the grace of God, God as I understand God, by the grace of God, I've been able to jock and find this little fine line between how far can you push this instrument to its limitations in terms of setting it up light enough so that you can play it with physical disabilities and at the same time execute what it is you're trying to do.
So a question to you would be: Were you more of an aggressive player in terms of how much muscle and effort you were using, let's say 20 years ago, as opposed to today?
Oh, definitely.
And,
yeah. I think I wore myself out early, to tell you the truth, because I used to be the guy that used to be a little bit too aggressive about it in my younger years. I was the guy that wanted to be able to be an extremely loud guitar player. And at one time I was. But I mean, the only way you do that is you set the instrument up so that you got pretty high action on it. You can hit a note pretty hard and retain the clarity. And but I don't know. It's like I listen to recordings of myself 20 and 25 years ago, and I don't really. There's not any huge perceived difference in the way I sound now and the way I sounded 20 or 25 years ago. So I've somehow learned to compensate for that. But I'm not alone in this, believe me. All my fellow musicians, they have made radical changes in the way that they set their instrument up and just the mechanics of the way they use their hands. Sam Bush and I were talking about it a couple of days ago. We were laughing about how these various changes we've had to make, as the aging process has happened. We don't have calluses as thick as we used to have, stuff like that. I told Sam, I said, what's going on here? I said, when the human body ages a little bit, I mean, does it lose its ability to retain callus on the hand? He looks at me and he laughs and he says, no. He says, we don't play as much as we used to. He says, that's where those calluses are going. He says, we used to play every day. He says, now we don't.
So would you imagine that had you decided 15 or 20 years ago to set up your guitar as it is presently set up, you would have perhaps advanced in your style, or it's something you would have maybe advised yourself to do at that time?
It wouldn't have worked, Chris, to tell you the truth. It would have been unacceptable. The same, yeah, the way that instrument is set up right now would be unacceptable, or would have been unacceptable 20 or 25 years ago. It would have, it just simply wouldn't have worked.
Can you talk a little bit about guitar setup in general, and perhaps your own personal preferences, and perhaps setup advice, how to maybe find areas on your guitar that are perhaps rough, and how to smooth that out in terms of easier to play and not requiring so much muscle, or...
Right. It's going to depend on the individual. And
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
there's a lot of factors. One is what the individual musician is trying to achieve. There's a lot of you here that'll be content to be able to play basic chords on a guitar, probably, and just have fun with it and sing along with it, or whatever you want to do. Well, if that be the case, then the setup of the instrument is not going to be near as critical as if though you were somebody who aspired to be able to explore all 20 frets of the instrument, or 21 frets. There's a lot of variables. There really is.
I've heard you talk about the height of the peg head nut, the height of the saddle, and perhaps you can go into a little bit of that, how adjustments in those areas can change the way your guitar can feel under your fingers.
Yeah, it makes it easier to play if those things are right. It's simple physics, that if a peg head nut and a bridge saddle are too low, well, then the instrument's going to rattle. If it's too high, it's going to be uncomfortable to play, and it will not play in tune. So you try to find that combination of, you know, how you get that in the pocket based on the intensity you're going to be playing with the right hand. The right hand dictates it as much as the left. Am I making sense here? I don't want to lose anybody.
Any other questions at all?
Yeah, right back there.
The acquisition of Clarence's guitar,
Yeah.
it's got to be a great story.
Yeah, it is. How much time you got? How much time have you?
We have time.
Actually, let's see if I can offer the condensed version.
Lose it will.
Actually, the person who's will to is kind of personal at this point right here, but it's not a wife or anything like that. You know, it's will to, but it is willed in such a way that some future extremely accomplished musician will be able to play it and enjoy it, or anybody that wants to. But anyway, Clarence had drifted away from bluegrass music in the mid-'60s and had started to take an interest in other music forms. He was discovered by a country guitar player at the time named James Burton. Took an interest in Clarence, and they befriended each other. James said, boy, you know, if this guy can play an acoustic guitar like this right here, imagine what he could do with electric. So anyway, he got Clarence interested in electric guitar, and Clarence took to that right away and started to work with Ricky Nelson. So he wasn't using the old herringbone, and him and Susie, his wife, had just gotten married, and they needed some bread to move into an apartment and go on a honeymoon. so anyway, Clarence, there was a guy that Clarence had essentially borrowed some money from and used this old guitar as collateral. And in the process, some little family political things that I will not go into came into play, but the guy would never let Clarence have the guitar back. So anyway, I found out who the guy was. And I said, hey, I'm Tony Rice, that's a guitar I need right there. Price is no object, what do you want for it? I'm not even gonna tell you how little I paid for it. It would stun you how little I paid for it.
It's been written about.
I'm sorry?
It's been written about. I mean, the whole mom.
Oh, yeah, the White family bought it for $35.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I bought it for $550. And its current vintage market, vintage instrument market collector value, I would not even, I'm almost afraid to mention that. I let that cat out of the bag.
And you still travel with these?
Yeah, I do rarely, not very, well, weather permitting, I travel with it. I don't like to travel with it, I don't mind traveling with it in the winter. The summer, the heat of the summer, because I don't fly on airplanes anymore, you know, I have to travel with it in my car, and that's a factor. But I played another instrument for many, many years, and it's made by Santa Cruz Guitar Company. That has been my primary instrument for 5 years. But for you all here in this event, I figured it would be mandatory to bring this one. You all might kill me.
I'm just curious if you know by chance the reason and the mystery behind the extra large sound hole on that particular guitar. Was it a mistake? Was it a prototype? What do you think that might have been, or have you heard the story?
Yeah, the story I heard, which I have reason to believe is true, is that the person who traded this guitar into, let's see, let me step back here. The White family bought this guitar at the original McCabe's guitar shop in Long Beach, California, and it had been traded in by a crippled lady that had polio. It was in her family, and she had owned it. And she was a student at UCLA. And anyway, somebody had told her that this one wasn't any good anymore, that the sound hole was all cut away and it was all banged up. So somebody had convinced her that a new one would be much better. So she traded this one in and got a new Martin D28. How about that? Question. So nobody knows who took a knife and started whittling on this.